You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jeannie Pendziwol.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, click on the subscribe buttons in the right-hand sidebar. There's places where you can subscribe in iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher Radio and even YouTube, hankgarner.com. I'd like to thank some sponsors that make this show possible. Grammarly. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank to sign up for your free account. Grammarly, built by linguists and language lovers, Grammarly's writing app finds and corrects hundreds of complex writing errors, so you don't have to. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank when you're working on that new book before you send it to your final editor. Let Grammarly take a pass at it. You'd be surprised at what it'll catch, and your editor will thank you for it. Brand new from Stefan Bolt's The White Dragon Omnibus Edition. This book has been 2 years in the making for those of us that have been following along as Stefan has released the books Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy. We have been on the edge of our seats waiting to see how he would finish the series, and now you can read it all in one volume. No waiting. Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy, The White Dragon series by Stefan Boltz. Available now. There's links to it in the show notes. Untold Deception by William Stakos. I looked up. The executioner pulled the lever. Her body fell, and the crowd cheered. I couldn't watch the rest, so I lowered my eyes to the ground. I think I understand now. I get it, Mom. I now know what it means to grow up. Untold Deception by William Stakos is a book full of magic, a coming-of-age story, and a story about family. Check out the link in the show notes, Untold Deception by William Stakos. Stay tuned after the show for an audiobook clip for Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jeannie Pendziwol on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book called The Lighthouses Daughters. And let me tell you guys, this book will blow your socks off. So I'm really excited for those of you out in the listening audience to read this book, and I'm super excited to talk to Jean about it today. Welcome to the show, Jean.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Jean, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
That's kind of difficult to pin down because I think, like a lot of writers, I've always had a fascination with words and crafting with words, and was always an avid reader from a really young age. But I do remember when I was in elementary school, I think it was about grade 6, I wrote a short story, and my teacher at the time passed it along to the librarian at the school. And they took my story and, put a cardboard cover on it, and I drew a little picture, and we bound it and gave it a catalog number and actually put it into the school library. And I felt quite accomplished, to be able to go into the library where I was frequently looking for books to read, and to be able to go to the shelf and find my own book on the shelf in the library. So that was quite an inspiration for me.
Yeah, I'll say so. I've talked to a number of authors who have had this experience where a teacher, a lot of times, or sometimes a parent, or someone recognized this storytelling gift that a kid has, and they not only encouraged the kid, but went one step farther in helping them to make an actual book. It is something that feels like a real book to a kid. And that experience sticks with people. There's something tangible and tactile about having your story with a cover and bound together, that kind of demystifies it, I think, for a lot of people.
I think it's very validating, especially for a young person, to have somebody, whether it's a teacher or a parent, or in my case, it was a librarian, to take a piece of work that I had created and say, you know what, this is worth putting on the shelf. This is worth having other people look at and other people read. And I don't know, I think it's probably a very similar experience for other writers, but the first time you hold your new book in your hand, and, you take it out of that box and you've got the advanced copy from the publisher, and, you pull it out and there's your name on the cover, and there's all the work that's gone into the text and the writing inside, and all the careful thought and attention that's gone into putting together the cover as well. And you look at it and think, wow, I had a hand in creating that. And it's pretty inspiring. And I think, for younger children at an early age, a similar type of experience, a similar type of feeling, just to know that, somebody else thinks my work is worthwhile.
Exactly. So from that early experience, and what a validating early experience that was, did you continue to write, and was this something that you knew that you were going to maybe study in college and pursue professionally?
I always, like I said, I always liked playing with words and language. And I think, while I didn't ever see myself as being a novelist, I knew I always wanted to work with words in some capacity. So during my, elementary and high school days, I enjoyed writing short stories and took advanced English classes whenever I could, and wrote a lot of really bad poetry that has never seen the light of day and never will. But then I went on to work in magazine publishing and writing more in a commercial sense. So I did a lot of, researching and profiling and that for trade magazines, which I really enjoyed. I also did a lot of photography at the time, and I loved the visual element of it and incorporating that in with my texts. But I think the first time I really pursued being published and thinking of myself as an author in a traditional sense was through children's writing. So after my own children were born, and I had kind of stepped back a bit from the commercial writing that I was doing, and I began to read a lot of children's picture books, I became really, really fascinated with the format and the concept of co-creation, where you have a text that's marrying with images. And I loved the brevity of language and, just condensing down a story or a thought, a sentiment, emotion, a visual image, and bringing that into a very concise format of about 500 words. So my first foray really into traditional publication was through children's writing.
What brought you to children's writing? What was the initial catalyst that for the first story that you wrote?
The first book I had published, I'd written several stories before, but the first book that was published is a story called No Dragons for Tea, Fire Safety for Kids and Dragons, and the catalyst for that was my own daughter. She had developed an almost obsessive fear of fires and more so fire alarms, a very loud alarm. And she had just started attending school, so she was 5 years old. And as a parent, my first reaction was, okay, well, let's go to the library and let's learn about fire safety. And, I always feel that knowledge is empowering for children. So the resources that we found at the library were unfortunately very didactic and very condescending, and actually almost more frightening. Don't play with matches, smoke is poison. And I chose then to work with my daughter and to find a way to tell a story to her that would provide her with the important safety information about fires and getting out of a burning building, but doing it in a way that was accessible for children and didn't contribute more to the fear that was already there.
Well, and using a dragon was genius. Which, and the covers are phenomenal for those books, and the dragon is kind of silly, and he's got a teddy bear, and that probably is very disarming for kids.
Yeah, and I think I worked also with a fire prevention education officer who was absolutely fabulous in supporting me through that and ensuring that the information I presented was relevant and factual. But the use of the dragon was very intentional, because here you have a mythical creature who accidentally starts the fire. He's responsible for the fire. So a child can put themselves into the story and learn through the story and the interactions between the dragon and the child in the story. But at the same time, it's not a situation that they would ever realistically put themselves in, because who really has dragons come over for tea?
Right. And I think you went on to write 4 of those dragon books. Is that right? Yes. Yeah. There are 4. So there's there's the fire safety, water safety, stranger safety, and bullying. Gotcha. You also did a whole series of more traditional looking picture books, very much reminiscent of like the little golden books and some maybe, probably, I don't know, but they're more, they look more traditional, to me. We have a whole shelf of books in our house that are reminiscent of these books. What were, these other, the non-dragon, books? What were they about, and how did you get started with those? Sure. Those books, I think for me, it was a different approach, a different writing style, much more lyrical, descriptive, very atmospheric, which evolved interestingly into the work that I've done in the Lighthouses Daughters. But I found the inspiration for those stories primarily in where I live and where I grew up in Northern Ontario. So I live on the North Shore of Lake Superior, and I've spent a lot of time as a child sailing on Lake Superior. Our family always had a sailboat. So I was very inspired by this incredible body of water that was so integral to my formative years, as well as, life in northwestern Ontario, some of the family history. So Maria Skis is a story about a little Finnish girl growing up in a small community. And then the Red Sash is inspired by fur trade history. And I think Once Upon a Northern Night is while it's rooted in an experience I had just waking up and looking out my window on an early winter morning, and the images of where the animals had walked through the snow and that the beauty of the first snowfall of the season. I think it has a universal appeal to it because it's a story it's simple, it's not simplistic, but it's about hope, and it's about the knowledge that even in the darkest times, even when we're not awake and even when we're not aware, things are happening, and that there is love and there's hope. So that is kind of the inspiration behind those stories. A lot of people think that they could easily write children's books, especially picture books, because if you break down the text, it's a lot of them maybe the length of a long poem, a short story. And on the surface, it seems to be, I could do this so easily, until you sit down and actually start trying to do it. And you realize pretty quickly that what you turn out is what you described as a lot of those books in the store that are trite or, condescending. And it's a really, really difficult skill. Was this something that easily came to you? Like how long did you work on this before you felt like, okay, this is this is a skill that I think I have, more so than the average person? Yeah, I tend to be a very concise writer to begin with, very descriptive, very visual in how I write. But I think you're right. There is this misconception that because picture books in particular
are short, that they're going to be quick and easy to write. And I can spend months and months on a single manuscript. Not that I'm working on it 8 hours a day, but it does take a lot of careful thought and consideration, and to ensure that every word is carrying the story, carrying the weight. It's essential. It needs to be there. It's purposeful, and I happen to love it. I can spend a lot of time just looking and thinking over the use of a single word, and whether it's doing what it needs to be doing in that short format. But I think it really comes down to respecting the reader. And the interesting thing about picture books is that the person who is reading is not necessarily the audience. So it's keeping both of those in mind. Most picture books are first read to children, so you have that adult involved as well. And for me, it's making sure that I'm writing something for the child that can resonate with them on some level, that I'm not speaking down to them, that I'm honoring who they are and their knowledge and their ability to grasp language and to grasp concepts that aren't simplistic and like you said, didactic or condescending.
A key word that I took out of what you said there was purposeful, you learn quickly to appreciate the density of language, and by density we don't mean huge words with complex meanings. We mean finding the word that carries the most meaning and the proper word in the proper place. I would think that writing for children is really an exercise in editing a lot of times, that trimming down and cutting and cutting and cutting until you get down to what really matters. Is that the way it is for you?
Yeah, I think that applies certainly to children's writing, but I think to all writing. I think the whole craft of writing, you spend a lot of time with your initial draft, certainly, but a lot of the work happens in the editing process.
Right.
Once you've got your first draft down, and then you go back and you're looking very carefully and very purposefully at the words that you've chosen, and paring it down to make sure that what is there needs to be there, that it's essential, that it's contributing to the story or the characters, and so there's that similarity. Whether you're writing for children or whether you're writing for adults, that is consistent across all the genres.
Well, when I first started reading your new book, The Lightkeeper's Daughters, and by the way, everybody, the book is available now everywhere in hardcover, Kindle, audiobook, however you consume books, it's available. But when I first started reading it, I didn't realize your history in writing children's books. And when I found that out, I think The Lightkeeper's Daughter impressed me even more, because I started looking for those things, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I thought that would be a great bridge, because every word should be meaningful when you're writing, whether it's children's books, for adults, for whatever. There shouldn't be wasted language on the page. First off, what was the idea for this book, and what was the transition like for you from writing children's books to writing something for a much broader audience?
Well, the idea again came from my love for where I live, and a desire to capture that, and to put some of the history of the area and some of the magic of Lake Superior into a story. So having grown up on Lake Superior and spent every summer vacation and most summer weekends out on the lake on a sailboat, I was familiar with the setting for the story, with Porphyry Island and with some of the other locales that are mentioned in the book. And I thought it would be really interesting to examine the relationship between sisters, and to do that in an area of relative isolation, out at a lighthouse where you're kind of at the mercy of the wind and the waves and the weather and the ability to come and go off the island and the people who come to visit the island. So I found some inspiration in that, and also from some other history of the area. So there were lightkeepers that served at that island and who kept journals, and I was able to look into those journals and read some of that, and also tap into some other experiences of people who served out at Porphyry Island as lightkeepers, and I found great inspiration in that. But one of the challenges that I faced when I decided that I wanted to write a novel-length work of fiction was my own mental block, in that, well, you write for children, and to go from writing something that is typically 500 words long or 1,000 words long to tackling something that would be 85,000 words long just seemed like a daunting task for me. So I decided, I kind of poked along for a little while trying to get things started. And then once I acknowledged that I tend towards writing lyrical prose and being descriptive and atmospheric, and just acknowledging that about me as my writing style and my voice and how I write, and running with that was the first step. And then also transitioning again from that concept of how many words, I thought, gosh, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to write a story that's 80,000 to 85,000 words long. But what I did was I looked at it 500 words at a time and said, you know what, you can write 500 words. You can write a 500-word story and capture a lot in that. So an 8,500 or 85,000 word book is really only 500 words at a time. And so I approached it that way. And what ended up happening is the story began to flow, and the characters began to evolve and come to life on the page, and it just really moved forward from there.
Most children's books tend to be one single scene, or at least the focus on one single character through a specific day or task or something like that. So did you think of it that way, that this is it's 85,000 words is 500 words in a chunk, or a series of scenes? Did you ever think of it like that?
Yeah, I did. I eventually, once I got a better grasp of the story and, had it in my mind, kind of this skeletal outline of what the plot was, I was able to break that down into scenes. And at one point I had the scenes all listed on little index cards and color-coded because of the multiple points of view, the two voices with the character of Elizabeth and the character of Morgan alternating back and forth. And then also the dual timelines, the historical and then the contemporary. So I had that all laid out on my dining room table on index cards, and made threats to my kids that if anybody ever opened a window and blew them over, there would be hell to pay.
I love it. You've got some really interesting things that happen in the book. One, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, Lake Superior is almost a character in the book, and it when you think of a stunning setting like that, most of what you think about our visual cues. Of course, there are sounds and smells and things like that, but the first thing that really resonates with you is just the vastness of it, and the lighthouse, and all of these visual things. Well, then one of your main characters here loses her sight, and then everything is kind of turned on its head there. What was the idea behind using that motif?
Yeah, I think there is the art element to it as well that moves as a thread through the story in a couple of ways, and for Elizabeth to lose her sight and the book to be so visually grounded was an interesting twist and created some complications for me as I was trying to work her through the story. But I think what the loss of her sight allowed her to do is to see in other ways. And for me, when I'm describing location, and particularly Lake Superior, which it was very intentional. I wanted the lake to evolve as a character in the story. it's that ability to experience life in all its many ways, whether that's through sight or through sound or through the emotion that it brings. And I think it created a really interesting element to Elizabeth's character, and it also functioned in the plot as well, because that required an additional person to read her father's diaries, to read the journals, and that meant that Morgan's presence was essential for her in discovering her past, and she had to then rely on this other person to assist in kind of unpacking her history and her relationship with her sister and her family.
Which and with the introduction of Morgan, there's also something interesting that I picked up on, and it may or may not be intentional, probably not, but the idea that when you write children's books, that there's that intermediary, that adult that has to read to children. And in this situation, the Lightkeeper's daughter, we've kind of reversed those roles, and we have the adult Elizabeth who has a young person reading the journals to her. Was that something intentional, or am I just crazy?
No, that wasn't intentional, but that's really interesting insight. I'd never thought of it that way before, but you're right. Here we have this, young character Morgan, who is essential in bringing this story to life for Elizabeth. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. With Morgan and the relationship with Elizabeth, what were you hoping to bring out in the relationship between these two people that are so different and at such different places? How is their relationship essential to the story?
Yeah, I think without spoiling, I'm going to have to
that's why I ask questions kind of cagey, because I want you to say what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I think I really wanted to examine, independently, both Morgan and Elizabeth, the concept of family. Morgan is, she's lost she was being raised by her grandfather, doesn't know her mother or her father, and her grandfather passes away, and she ends up in the foster care system. And just to explore a little bit that concept of family, and then bring that into the relationship with this elderly woman, kind of kicking and screaming. Morgan is forced to do community service at the senior home where Elizabeth is living, and that brings the two characters together. And in many ways they're very different. They come from different generations, but there's so many similarities and overlap between them that really that generational difference shrinks the further the story goes along, and the closer the two characters come together.
We talked a little bit about the writing of the book and how you had to kind of get in the mindset of taking on this longer project. But what happened when you finished the book, and the publishing process between a children's and adults book is completely different? It's a whole different industry. How did you go about getting your book out to the world?
Yeah, that you're right. It is a very different industry, and I've worked and developed really good relationships with the two publishers that I work with for my children's books. So branching out into the world of adult publishing was quite a learning process for me. I needed to go through the querying and acquiring of an agent to represent my work, and then go into the whole adult publishing and pitching and that sort of thing. And it was all completely new and intimidating for me. I fortunately have a really, really wonderful group of writers that I connect with locally on a regular basis, who were tremendously supportive through the whole process. And without them, this novel definitely would not have made it off my computer. I joke around that it would have stayed in my sock drawer. My initial query that I sent out, I sent out one query to an agent, and it was it was daunting, but the request came back for the full manuscript, and I think a lot of writers can understand that request for the full is just so exciting. So I sent off the full manuscript, and then I received back a rejection on that, and I thought, well, that was it. Nobody likes my story. Then I'm just going to put it away. That it's done. And this group of friends encouraged me, and they said, oh, don't be ridiculous. You need to send it out, and probably multiple times in order for it to be seen. And, if you believe in your work and persist with it. So I did, and I sent it out again and signed with Jenny Bent, who's been absolutely fabulous. And then she's walked me through the process of getting the book published with HarperCollins in North America, and then all of the foreign rights as well. So it has been a learning process throughout, and I'm so grateful for my agent Jenny, who's been just absolutely fabulous, but also for this group of fellow writers who all write in different genres, and they're at different stages, whether they're independently published or hybrid publishers or traditionally published. They've really been supportive through the whole process, and I really do encourage all writers to connect with fellow writers. I think it's important for celebrating the highs, but encouraging through the lows as well, and just helping you to believe in your work.
Well, the new book is absolutely fascinating and a fantastic read. The Lighthouses Daughters. For a debut novel, you really hit it out of the park with this one, Jean. I'm recommending it to everyone I bump into. What are you working on now? Are you pursuing more children's writings? Are you going to write another adult novel? What's going on with you?
Yeah, a little of both, actually. Like I said, I really, really love the children's picture book format, and I don't think I could ever stop writing that. So I do have a couple of children's books manuscripts that I've completed and will be published in a couple of years. They'll be going through the editing and then the illustrating process on that. And then I'm beginning research right now on another adult novel, and I'm finding that very exciting and, interestingly, not less intimidating the second time around. But, I've learned a lot through the process, and I'm really looking forward to diving in.
Excellent. Well, we can't wait to see what you come up with next, Jean. If people are just learning about you and your work now, where can they find you online and dig into all that you do?
Yeah, I'm online. My website is jeanniependziwol.com, I believe. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I'd be happy to connect with readers.
Excellent. Jean, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Hank.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, Child of the Jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.